Welcome to Starbound. My name's Chikondi, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Frerin and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now let's get into today's story. Fleet Conductor Lindar Sol's command state shattered the moment his bioship's sensors detected a reality that defied every law of nature his species knew. 19 separate fusion signatures, industrial-scale power consumption that exceeded his entire fleet's output, thermal radiation that suggested not managed energy, but deliberate, wasteful burning of resources on a scale that made his species' nervous system recoil in biological horror. The convergent harmony shuddered around him, its living walls flickering from the soft blue-green of calm analysis to sickly yellow streaks of distress. The ship's bioluminescent panels pulsed with their rhythmic clashing colors, responding to Lindar's mounting nausea as he stared at readings that violated every principle of rational engineering.
"Fleet Conductor!"
Bioengineer Kesdal's voice carried a subsonic tremor of revulsion.
"The energy signature is... It appears to be a single object. Mass readings suggest something 20 kilometers in length, thermal output equivalent to a small star's corona."
Lindar felt his throat tighten, the biological response his species had evolved to prevent the waste of precious resources. But this wasn't their careful rationing. This was observing something that burned energy like it was infinite.
"They built that in a gravity well,"
he whispered. The words escaped before he could stop them. The idea was so fundamentally wrong that his mind struggled to process it. Every civilization learned the bedrock principles of propulsion. Launching mass from a planetary surface required exponential energy costs. You built ships in zero gravity, using symbiotic biomechanical processes that worked with natural forces rather than against them. No species was wealthy enough to waste the resources required to build a capital ship on a planet's surface. It was like burning food for light when you had access to fire. Kesdal's readings continued, each number more disturbing than the rest.
"Fleet Conductor, the thermal dissipation patterns suggest they are deliberately venting excess heat. The energy they are wasting as thermal radiation could power one of our bioships for months."
The convergent harmony's walls pulsed with deeper yellows now, veined with orange distress markers. Lindar's personal quarters began to emit the low, mournful hum that indicated a ship responding to its conductor's psychological state. Throughout his small fleet, he could feel the other bioships picking up the disturbance, their living hulls beginning to resonate with shared unease. This was not how first contact with a new species was supposed to proceed. 6 hours later, Lindar's enforcement fleet had arrived at the edge of the Bellatrix 808 system with the quiet confidence that came from 3 millennia of successful diplomacy. The Silthane Compact had refined the art of civilized negotiation to its purest form, a demonstration of superior capability followed by generous terms for tributary status. The humans had been in galactic space for 4 decades now, long enough to understand how things worked. Their ships were adequate, converted civilian vessels with the kind of functional aesthetics that suggested a species still learning proper engineering principles, nothing that would require serious force to manage. Through the convergent harmony's living sensors, Lindar observed the human asteroid mining operation with both interest and growing disgust. Massive automated platforms attacked the rocky debris with all the subtlety of a forest fire. Fusion torches that could have delicately separated valuable materials instead blasted away cubic miles of rock. Industrial grinders pulverized entire asteroids without regard for selective extraction techniques.
"Look at this waste," Kesdal muttered. "They're consuming thousands of tons of reaction mass for operations that properly trained organisms could accomplish with a fraction of the resources."
Lindar watched a human harvester platform consume an asteroid roughly the size of a Silthane city. The brute force mining operation used more energy in 10 minutes than his home colony consumed in a month. Worse, they were doing it with mechanical systems, dead, inert machines that couldn't adapt, couldn't self-repair, couldn't respond to changing conditions with the fluid intelligence of living technology.
Evolutionary prisoners of abundance,
Lindar said, unconsciously echoing a phrase from his tactical training.
They never learned resource discipline because they never had to. It makes them fundamentally weak.
The concept was sound. Every species that survived to achieve spaceflight learned to work within limits, to make every gram of mass and every joule of energy serve multiple purposes. The artful bioships of the Compact were expressions of that philosophy, living machines that grew rather than being built, that could repair themselves, that treated the conservation of resources as a biological imperative. These humans clearly hadn't learned that lesson. They threw raw industrial power at problems instead of solving them with intelligence and artful purpose. It was the kind of approach that might work within a single resource-rich system, but would collapse the moment they encountered a species that had learned to do more with less. Lindar felt a deep satisfaction as he watched their crude mining operations. This would be simpler than he'd anticipated. When visual confirmation finally resolved on the displays, Lindar's satisfaction evaporated like atmosphere through a hull breach. The thing that emerged from hyperspace wasn't a ship in any recognizable sense. It was a framework, a massive lattice of modules, weapons pods, and industrial systems that looked like someone had built a city and then decided to make it mobile. Radiator fins the size of city blocks glowed cherry red against the black of space, venting waste heat with the casual profligacy of a bonfire built from rare timber. The thermal signature alone was obscene. The Convergent Harmony's sensors registered heat output that could have warmed an entire Silthane colony for years, just casually dumped into space, as if energy was so abundant that precise thermal management wasn't worth the effort. Lindar felt the familiar wave of nausea wash over him, the biological response his species had evolved when witnessing resource waste. But this wasn't just waste. This was waste on a scale so vast it seemed almost deliberate, as if the humans were advertising their abundance like a threat display. The elegant blade and silent current began to pulse with sympathetic discord, their own systems responding to their conductors' mounting distress. Standard diplomatic protocols had worked for 3,000 years of Silthane expansion, present superior capability, demonstrate the futility of resistance, offer generous terms that preserved the dignity of all parties involved. Clean, artful, conclusive.
Human vessel, you are operating in space claimed by the Silthane Compact under the Kithara Accords. Submit to inspection and prepare to discuss terms for tributary status.
Lindar's message went out on standard diplomatic frequencies, accompanied by subsonic undertones that conveyed respectful but firm authority. He expected the usual responses: bluster, negotiation attempts, perhaps a token show of defiance before the inevitable recognition of superior force. The reply came 4 minutes later.
Silthane Fleet, this is Captain Anna Taggart, UES Redundancy. I'm not familiar with the Kithara Accords, but I'll need to see your environmental impact assessment for this system before I can approve any industrial activities. Also, what's your operational safety rating for working in proximity to active mining operations?
Lindar stared at the communication display. The human captain was treating this like a workplace safety discussion. Her voice carried no subsonic undertones because humans apparently didn't use them, but her tone suggested someone dealing with a routine administrative complication.
Human Captain, you misunderstand the situation. This is a military enforcement action. Submit to inspection or face the consequences.
Another 4-minute delay. Throughout the Convergent Harmony, panels began to shift toward yellow as Lindar's certainty wavered.
Military enforcement? Sir, the redundancy carries sufficient manufacturing capacity to establish permanent mining infrastructure in this system if our survey work is interrupted by continued unauthorized vessel presence. I'm required to ask, are you certain you want to escalate this situation? Because if you're planning to interfere with scheduled operations, I'll need to implement worksite hazard clearance protocols.
Lindar felt the ship's walls pulse with confused orange light. The human was talking about manufacturing capacity and worksite protocols as if this was an industrial dispute rather than a military confrontation. She was treating his enforcement fleet like obstacles to be cleared away. The enforcement array that had successfully resolved conflicts for 3 millennia was a work of art. 7 bioships arranged in a spiral pattern that maximized regenerative energy sharing while presenting minimal target profiles. Each vessel could support the others, creating a network of living ships that became stronger under stress.
Elegant solution, Spiral,
Lindar commanded, and felt a subsonic hum of satisfaction as he watched his ships move into position with fluid grace. The convergent harmony took point, with the elegant blade and silent current forming the primary wing. The 4 smaller escort vessels spread into supporting positions, their bioluminescent hulls beginning to pulse in a unified, steady rhythm. It was beautiful. It was artful. It was the product of 3,000 years of evolutionary refinement in the art of space warfare. The human response was to rotate their massive framework 90 degrees and present what appeared to be the broadest possible cross-section to his fleet.
Fleet Conductor!
Kesdal's voice carried subsonic tones of growing distress.
The human vessel is not maneuvering to minimize target profile.
Through the convergent harmony sensors, Lindar watched the UES redundancy complete its rotation. Instead of presenting the narrow profile that would minimize incoming fire, the human ship oriented its framework to show the maximum possible surface area. Launching bays, weapon mounts, and industrial systems spread across a front that seemed to stretch for miles. But worse than the tactical stupidity was what Kesdal reported next.
Fleet Conductor! Internal scans detect massive industrial activity aboard the human vessel. They appear to be manufacturing ordnance while we observe. Missile production, railgun slug fabrication, and what appears to be... Yes, they're producing replacement parts for their own systems.
Lindar felt his throat constrict with the familiar nausea of witnessing waste. They were running industrial processes during a military confrontation. They were expending energy and resources on manufacturing that any rational species would have completed before the battle began. The convergent harmony's walls pulsed with deeper yellows now, and Lindar could feel the subsonic distress spreading through his array. His bioships were responding to waste on a scale that their evolution had never prepared them to witness. The humans weren't just tactically incompetent. They were treating a military engagement like a construction project. Anna Taggart's bridge aboard the UES redundancy would have looked like a mining operation control room to any human observer. Status boards showed resource flows, manufacturing queues, and industrial capacity utilization. The captain herself sat at a workstation that could have been pulled from any deep space construction project, reviewing checklists with the same professional calm she'd brought to building orbital habitats in the belt.
Confirm fabricators are spooled for kinetic slugs,
She said to her XO Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma.
Confirmed. Foundries 1 through 8 are running continuous production. Current output rate is approximately 4,000 slugs per minute. Mining lasers? Slaved to point defense grid. All systems green. Damage control teams. Standing by with standard industrial repair protocols. Welding rigs, patch plates, and emergency sealants are positioned throughout the framework.
Taggart took a sip of coffee from a thermal mug that bore the logo of Titan Construction Consortium and looked at the tactical display showing the artful spiral of Zilthane's bioships. Pretty, she had to admit, like a synchronized swimming routine, but in space.
EXO, what's our ordnance fabrication budget for this operational phase? Current estimates suggest we'll expend approximately 12% of capacity for complete hazard clearance. 12%,
Taggart nodded.
Let's see if we can wrap this up before the next shift change. I've got a mineralogical survey to complete, and we're already behind schedule.
Lindar's first strike was a textbook application of overwhelming force against a critical system. The Convergent Harmony and Elegant Blade synchronized their bioenergy weapons, living systems that could adapt their output frequencies to penetrate any known shielding technology. Their target, the largest of the 19 fusion signatures aboard the human vessel. The organic weapon systems achieved perfect targeting solutions. Coherent energy beams struck the human ship's reactor cluster with a pulse calibrated to the exact megajoule, delivering the amount of force required to disable a fusion plant without causing catastrophic secondary explosions. One of the 19 energy signatures flickered and died. The UES redundancy didn't even slow down.
What?
Lindar began, then stopped as he watched automated systems jettison the damaged reactor module like a broken tool. Mechanical arms swung a replacement into position, connecting power feeds and coolant lines with the unthinking speed of a factory assembly line. The entire process took 2 minutes.
They're treating reactor modules like...
Kesdal's subsonic vibrations carried disbelief so strong it made the ship's walls pulse with orange alarm.
like replaceable components, just parts.
Lindar felt his species' nervous trigger again. The nausea wasn't just psychological. It was genetic, evolved over millennia of scarcity-based selection. Watching someone treat a fusion reactor as a disposable component violated something fundamental in his biological architecture. But he was a fleet conductor of the Silthane Compact. He had 2 centuries of experience. He could adapt to unexpected tactics. The human response taught him otherwise. The UES redundancy's return fire violated every principle of rational space combat. Instead of precisely targeting energy weapons designed to disable specific systems, the human ship vomited metal into space. Thousands of solid core projectiles launched from railgun batteries throughout the framework, followed by swarms of missiles that filled the vacuum between the fleets with a spreading cloud of destructive potential. It lacked all artistry, all finesse. It was the space warfare equivalent of trying to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. It was also devastatingly effective. The silent current took the first hit. A solid core slug moving at a significant fraction of light speed punched through her biohull's defensive carapace and exploded out the other side, taking half the ship's command pathways with it. The bioship's death cry echoed through the fleet's shared sensory network, a sound like nail on chalkboard that made every other vessel shudder in sympathetic pain. Graceful approach and deep resonance tried to maneuver clear of the expanding debris field, but the human projectiles weren't fired in neat, predictable patterns. They came from every direction, launched from weapon pods scattered throughout the enemy framework, creating a zone of lethally dense metal that no amount of artful maneuvering could avoid.
Fleet conductor!
Kesdal's voice was a subsonic thrum of pure horror.
They're using more ammunition per minute than our entire fleet carries in total. This level of resource expenditure, it's not sustainable. It's not possible.
But it was happening. The UES redundancy's internal foundries were producing replacement ordnance in real time, manufacturing missiles and railgun slugs as fast as they fired them. Elegant Blade managed to avoid the worst of the barrage, her biohull's adaptive systems changing configuration to present a smaller target profile. But even she took hits, solid chunks of processed metal that punched through living tissue with the brutal finality of industrial accidents. The array was falling apart. Ships that had moved in synchronized harmony were now scattered, damaged, bleeding atmosphere and biofluids into space. The sensory network that connected them all carried the discord of pain and confusion, making it impossible to coordinate effective responses. Lindar stared at his tactical display and tried to understand what kind of species built a ship that could manufacture its own ammunition during battle. It was like watching someone reload a weapon by building a new weapons factory. The projectile fragment that Convergent Harmony's retrieval drone brought aboard was roughly the size of Lindar's fist, a chunk of twisted metal that had somehow survived impacting his ship's biohull at relativistic speeds. Kesdal took it to his laboratory, handling it with the care of someone examining a dangerous artifact. Lindar expected the analysis to reveal sophisticated materials of science, exotic alloys, smart matter configurations, or at least some evidence of advanced guidance systems. The humans might be wasteful, but surely their weapons incorporated some refined engineering principles. Kesdal's report was a subsonic vibration of barely controlled revulsion.
Fleet Coordinator, it's just iron! Iron-nickel alloy, to be precise. The same composition as a common metallic asteroid. There are no guidance systems, no exotic materials, no sophisticated engineering. They are literally just throwing process asteroid debris at us.
Lindar felt the same wave of nausea wash over him, but this time it was accompanied by a different emotion: relief. If the humans were reduced to using crude, solid projectiles, they must be running short of sophisticated ammunition. Their industrial abundance was just a facade, and their rough tactics were signs of desperation.
They must not have any advanced ammunition on board, then,
he told Kesdal.
These iron slugs are what they're reduced to when their real weapons are exhausted. Order the fleet to close range. We can exploit their weakness before they can manufacture more sophisticated ordnance.
The bioengineer's subsonic response carried doubt, but he transmitted the order. Throughout the array, the surviving Silthane ships began to accelerate toward the human vessel, their living hulls rippling with the kind of adaptive changes that would let them self-repair faster than the crude human weapons could inflict damage. Lindar felt his confidence returning. The humans had shown their hand, brute force and resource waste. Now he would demonstrate the superiority of artful purpose. The close-range assault should have been a textbook application of Silthane tactical doctrine. Bioships with living hulls that could adapt to damage, regenerate destroyed systems, and coordinate their attacks through a shared sensory network. Against a crude industrial platform that relied on throwing metal, they should have been untouchable. Instead, Lindar discovered that the UES Redundancies framework bristled with defensive systems that had been repurposed from industrial applications. Mining lasers designed to cut through asteroid cores tracked his ships with tracking solutions that treated capital vessels like chunks of ore to be processed. Construction manipulators, massive mechanical arms built for moving multi-ton chunks of metal, swatted at incoming bioships with casual force. And the armor plating. The armor plating was insane. Lindar watched his ship's bioenergy weapons splash against barriers that were simply too thick to penetrate. Not refined energy shields that could be modulated or frequency shifted. Just solid matter, layer upon layer of it, designed to absorb direct fusion hits without sophisticated dissipation systems.
Fleet Conductor!
The weapons officer's subsonic signals carried notes of desperate confusion.
Our weapons are achieving direct hits, but the human vessel's armor thickness exceeds our penetration capabilities. They appear to have built their ship's hull out of solid metal.
Solid metal. Not the carefully grown biomechanical composites that could adapt to damage. Not the elegant energy-resistant materials that the Compact had developed over millennia of warfare. Just thick, crude, stupid armor that stopped sophisticated weapons through the simple expedient of being too massive to cut through. It was like trying to break down a wall by throwing precision instruments at it. The combat drones that the UES Redundancy deployed were equally offensive to every principle of artful warfare. Instead of sleek fighter craft with sophisticated maneuvering systems and advanced weapons, the humans launched what appeared to be modified construction robots. Industrial cutting tools had been weaponized, welding rigs had been equipped with targeting systems, and cargo manipulators had been programmed for combat operations. They moved with the awkward purposefulness of industrial equipment, lacking the fluid grace of purpose-built combat systems. They should have been easy targets for the bioship's point defense networks. Instead, they were devastating. The construction robots operated like mobile power tools, designed for the kind of harsh conditions and rough handling that would destroy more sophisticated systems. While Silthane bioweapons damaged them, they kept functioning with mechanical stubbornness. When their crude weapons hit bioship hulls, they cut through living tissue with the brutal utility of industrial accidents. Elegant Blade found herself surrounded by 6 of the ungainly machines, each one attacking with different industrial tools. A plasma cutting torch burned through her port fin, while a cargo manipulator physically grabbed her starboard weapon pod and began to crush it like a piece of scrap metal.
They're not fighting us,
the ship's pilot reported, his subsonic signals carrying bewildered fear.
They're processing us like we're raw metals to be salvaged.
Lindar watched the display with growing horror as his elegant array was systematically dismantled by opponents that treated space combat like a demolition project. The construction robots didn't maneuver to avoid fire. They simply absorbed damage and kept working, mechanical systems that had been designed to function in the harsh environment of deep space industrial operations. His bioships, evolved for combat against rational opponents, found themselves facing enemies that operated with the relentless persistence of machinery. No fear, no pain, no tactical considerations, just the methodical application of industrial force to the problem of disabling enemy vessels. Deep within the UES Redundancies framework, Human Damage Control Team 7 responded to hull breaches and system failures with the same routine they brought to maintenance operations on asteroid mining platforms.
Got a hole in Section C7,
Team Leader Torres reported over the comm channel.
Looks like something chewed through the outer plating. Wilson, grab the welding rig. Mike, prep a patch plate.
The team moved through the ship's industrial corridors with a familiarity born of countless drills and real-world emergencies, stepping over power conduits and around manufacturing equipment as if navigating a construction site. Because that's essentially what it was. The redundancy had been built using the same modular principles as any deep space industrial platform.
What's the damage assessment?
Torres asked as they reached the breach.
Couple of tons of plating got peeled off,
Wilson reported, running a scanner over the twisted metal.
Structural integrity's still good, but we're leaking atmosphere. Standard patch job should handle it.
Mike was already positioning a prefabricated repair plate over the hole while Wilson fired up his welding rig.
Control, this is DC-7. We've got the breach sealed and are moving to the next work order. Estimate repair time is 15 minutes. Assuming we don't get any more of these chewed-up sections.
On the bridge, Captain Taggart acknowledged the report with the same casual attention she'd give to any routine maintenance issue. Outside the ship's framework, alien vessels were experiencing existential horror at humanity's approach to warfare. Inside, it was just another day at the construction site. As his fleet crumbled around him, Lendar's tactical computer began cross-referencing the human attack patterns with its extensive database of military histories. The biomechanical systems that managed the Convergent Harmony's information processing were designed to learn from new experiences, to find patterns that could predict enemy behavior. What they found made Lendar's species-deep nausea evolve into something approaching existential terror. The computer displayed archived footage from something humans called World War II, ancient conflicts fought on their home planet with crude but massive industrial systems. Lindar watched endless production lines turning out functional weapons, factories that produced aircraft and vehicles with the mechanical persistence of automated systems. But it was the historian's narration that crystallized his growing horror. The concept of the arsenal of democracy was simple. Outproduce the enemy. American industrial capacity produced more ships, more aircraft, more weapons than their opponents could destroy. Victory came not through tactical brilliance or technological superiority, but through overwhelming industrial output. The footage showed scenes that made Lindar's bioship walls pulse with distressed colors. Hundreds of aircraft filling the sky, their swarms so dense they blocked out the sunlight. Ships being launched from construction yards faster than enemy forces could sink them. Tanks rolling off assembly lines in numbers that turned warfare into an industrial process.
Fleet Conductor!
Kesdal's subsonic signals were sharp-edged with terror.
This isn't a new strategy for them. This is their species' proven solution to warfare. They've scaled it up from planetary conflicts to industrial operations that span entire star systems.
This wasn't desperate improvisation. This wasn't the flailing of a species that had never learned proper resource management. This was the deliberate application of abundance as a weapon, resource expenditure on a scale that made conventional military thinking irrelevant. The humans hadn't failed to learn artful purpose. They had made it obsolete. The retreat order came from Lindar himself, transmitted through subsonic frequencies that carried the bitter taste of defeat. With half his fleet destroyed or crippled, continuing the engagement would serve no purpose except to feed more bioships to the human industrial machine. But the UES redundancy didn't pursue the surviving Silthane vessels. Instead, it began what Captain Taggart's operational reports would later classify as asset reclamation operations. The massive construction arms that had crushed elegant blades swung into position around the debris field, mechanical systems that began to systematically harvest materials from the destroyed bioships. Living hulls that had taken decades to grow were processed with the same routine purpose the humans brought to asteroid mining, sorted, separated, and fed into the redundancy's internal refining systems.
Fleet Conductor!
Kesdal's voice carried subsonic undertones of barely controlled revulsion.
They're salvaging our ships! They're processing the biohull material like raw ore!
Lindar watched the methodical destruction of everything his culture considered sacred. Bioships weren't just vessels. They were flying expressions of Silthane engineering philosophy grown from genetic templates that represented thousands of years of evolutionary refinement. To see them treated as industrial waste, raw materials to be reclaimed and recycled, violated something fundamental in his species' worldview. But when Captain Taggart's voice came over the communication channel, her tone carried the same professional courtesy she might use to coordinate heavy equipment operations.
Silthane Fleet, we're implementing standard worksite safety protocols for the debris field. Medical assistance and crew extraction services are available for any personnel requiring support. Please advise if you need emergency medical response or technical assistance with damaged vessels.
Medical Officer Thindal's report carried subsonic patterns that made the Convergent Harmony's walls ripple with sympathetic distress. The human medical drones had indeed begun treating wounded Silthane personnel, but their methods were an assault on every principle of biomechanical healing.
Fleet Conductor, they use synthetic sutures, metallic clamps, chemical coagulants that halt bleeding through crude molecular interactions rather than encouraging natural tissue regeneration. They treat living flesh like broken machinery.
Lindar's species had developed medical arts that worked with biological systems, techniques that coaxed damaged tissue to repair itself, that enhanced natural healing processes through subsonic resonance and biochemical encouragement. Artful methods that treated the patient as a living system capable of self-repair. The human medical drones operated like field mechanics working on damaged equipment. They stopped bleeding by clamping vessels shut. They repaired torn tissue by stitching it together with artificial materials. They treated biological systems as if they were broken machines that needed replacement parts and crude repairs. The humans were saving Silthane lives through the same brute force approach they brought to every other problem. And it was working. Lindar felt his command state fracture as he tried to process the implications. His species' entire cultural identity was built around the concept of artful purpose, the idea that sophisticated solutions were inherently superior to crude ones. But here was evidence that sophistication could be a weakness, that crude methods with sufficient resources behind them could outperform any amount of refined engineering. The humans weren't just defeating his fleet, they were invalidating his species' fundamental assumptions about how the universe worked. The final confrontation came when Lindar, his pride and curiosity overriding his tactical judgment, opened a direct communication channel with the human captain.
Human Commander, I demand to know why your species would deploy such a resource-intensive monstrosity against what should have been a minor enforcement action. Your ship expends more energy in an hour than my fleet carries in total. What possible strategic doctrine justifies such waste?
The 4-minute communication delay felt like an eternity. When Captain Taggart's reply came, her voice carried the same professional courtesy she'd maintained throughout the engagement.
I'm sorry, monstrosity? Sir, the UES Redundancy is a surveyor-class platform. Her primary mission here is conducting mineralogical and gravitational analysis of the local asteroid belt for future resource exploitation. Engaging your fleet was a secondary objective, filed under a routine worksite hazard clearance.
The massive framework that had destroyed half his fleet, that operated with energy expenditure exceeding his civilization's industrial capacity, that treated combat as a routine maintenance operation, was classified as a survey vessel.
Survey-class platforms are designed for long-term independent operations in potentially hostile territory,
Taggart continued.
They carry complete manufacturing capabilities, defensive systems appropriate for the operational environment, and sufficient resources to establish permanent infrastructure if required. The Redundancy is actually one of our older survey platforms. We've got second-generation units coming online that are significantly more capable.
The communication channel fell silent as Lindar struggled to process the information. This wasn't humanity's primary military capability. This was routine industrial equipment designed for scientific missions and resource extraction operations. In an attempt to understand the true scale of humanity's industrial capacity, Lindar ordered his communications officer to analyze all human transmissions in the system. What they discovered was a vast network of automated reports that painted a picture of resource management on a scale that defied comprehension. Mining quotas from the asteroid belt, 12 million tons of processed ore per standard day, fusion fuel deliveries from gas giant refineries, enough to power a Silthane colony for decades, delivered every few hours. Construction schedules for orbital platforms, habitat rings, and manufacturing stations that dwarfed anything in compact space, built as routine infrastructure projects. Manufacturing requests from Earth's lunar installations alone exceeded the combined industrial output of a dozen Silthane worlds. And these were just the routine operational reports, the background noise of a civilization that had transformed its entire star system into a single, integrated industrial complex. Lindar stared at the analysis, trying to comprehend numbers that represented more energy and material than his species had manipulated in their entire history. The humans hadn't just achieved industrial abundance, they had made it their primary strategic weapon. Every ship they built, every platform they deployed, every survey mission they conducted was backed by resource flows that could support entire civilizations. They didn't optimize for artful purpose because they didn't need to. They had made it optional through the simple expedient of having more resources than any conceivable opponent could match. The Convergent Harmony's bioluminescent walls pulsed with colors that represented the death of worldviews, the collapse of fundamental assumptions about how civilizations were supposed to work. Lindar felt his species' 3,000-year-old confidence in its philosophy crumble under the weight of humanity's casual demonstration of infinite abundance. Captain Anna Taggart's after-action report was dictated to the ship's automated systems with the same professional detachment she brought to all routine operational documentation. Her voice carried no emotional undertones, no sense of triumph or drama, just the clinical detachment of someone completing required paperwork.
Mission report, Bellatrix 808 survey operation. Standard date 2387.156. Engaged non-compliant local vessels conducting unauthorized military operations in designated survey area. Sustained minor correctable structural damage to exterior framework sections C7 and G12. Expended approximately 12% of current ordnance fabrication budget. Worksite is now secure.
She paused to review the casualty reports on her display. 0 human fatalities, minimal equipment damage, all systems functioning within normal parameters.
Enemy vessels appear to have been constructed using organic materials and biomechanical systems. Salvage operations recovered approximately 40,000 tons of useful raw materials, primarily complex organic polymers suitable for recycling into industrial feedstock. Asset reclamation has exceeded projections by 15%.
From Taggart's perspective, the engagement had been a minor workplace incident that required documentation for safety compliance and operational reviews.
Recommend updating hazard clearance protocols for future survey operations and systems with indigenous military presence. Current defensive capabilities proved adequate, but engagement duration exceeded optimal time parameters. Mineralogical surveys will resume on schedule pending completion of site cleanup operations.
She ended the recording and submitted it to the automated systems that would process it alongside thousands of other routine operational reports. Outside the ship's reinforced viewports, additional human signatures were appearing at the edge of the system, massive platforms that made even the UES redundancy look small by comparison. The real work was about to begin. Fleet Conductor Lidar Sol composed his final report to the Silthane Compact with subsonic patterns that still carried the discord of shattered assumptions. His bioship's walls pulsed with colors that had no precedent in Silthane emotional vocabulary, hues that represented the collision between ancient wisdom and incomprehensible reality. The words came slowly, each concept requiring careful construction to convey truths that violated everything his species believed about civilization and warfare.
The humans have not built larger ships. They have industrialized warfare itself. They treat combat vessels as expendable manufacturing output rather than precious resources to be conserved. Their strategic doctrine is based not on artful purpose, but on overwhelming abundance applied as a weapon.
He paused, watching through the Convergent Harmony's sensors as the first of the human construction fleets arrived at the edge of the system. Mobile foundries that dwarfed the UES redundancy, habitat builders that could construct space cities, industrial platforms that represented more resource manipulation on a scale that made entire planets seem small.
Recommendation: immediate revision of all strategic assumptions regarding human capabilities. The vessel that engaged us was not a warship, but a survey platform. The engagement was not considered a military operation, but routine worksite hazard clearance. We have encountered a species that has solved the fundamental problem of resource scarcity through methods that our philosophy cannot comprehend.
The final lines were the hardest to compose.
My military fleet was never seen as a strategic threat requiring dedicated warships. We were worksite hazards to be cleared by whatever survey vessel happened to be in the area. The humans have not joined galactic civilization. They have made it obsolete.
As he sealed the report for transmission to the compact, Lindar heard Captain Taggart's voice confirm over the communication channels that the survey had been completed successfully and primary resource extraction operations could now commence. The asteroid belt that had taken his species decades to carefully map and analyze would be completely processed within a year, not because the humans needed the resources, but because they had the industrial capacity to do it and saw no reason not to.